bringing you the latest in tax credit news, insight, and analysis. This is Tax Credit Tuesday with your host, Michael Novogradac.
Hello, I'm Michael Novogradac, and this is Tax Credit Tuesday. This is the April 8th, 2025 episode. My guest this week is Wayne Michael, Novogradac's Senior Director of External Education and E-Learning. This is Wayne's second appearance on Tax Credit Tuesday. He first appeared roughly a year ago. Wayne is one of the nation's leading experts when it comes to simplifying and teaching complex tax and accounting issues to audiences at different levels of expertise. Wayne leads live webinars, teaches online workshops, and develops on-demand virtual courses on Novogradac's e-learning platform, NovocoTraining. Today, Wayne is going to share various ways you can learn through NovocoTraining. And I wanted to have Wayne back as a guest because I think a lot of what he does can take the listeners and the other members of this audience in much greater depth to the various topics that we do discuss on Tax Credit Tuesday. Also, with respect to NovocoTraining, we have some new options that we think you'll find useful. So we'll talk about that in the course of the podcast. Wayne and I have a lot we want to discuss today. So if you're ready, let's get started. Wayne, welcome back to Tax Credit Tuesday.
Mike, it's been a minute. I thought that it was just a few months ago, and then I realized it was more than a year ago. So we're due. We're due to get back together.
Yes, indeed. And while this is your second appearance, you are making a first, I think, in Tax Credit Tuesday, and that is your Hawaiian shirt. I don't think we've had a Hawaiian shirt worn by a guest before. So kudos to you. And I think there's probably a story behind your Hawaiian shirt.
Well, this is something Dirk Wallace and we were teaching the eligible basis webinar last month, and it's gotten big enough to where we had to split it over 2 days. We really wanted to have a break between the coat and tie on day one. And so we decided just to go Hawaiian shirts on day two, just to mix things up quite a bit, and thought, are we going to lose people? Are they going to think we're no longer professional? Although I heard that in Hawaii, this can be very dinner attire and formal. Maybe it's the collar, but it's also, I think, maybe a subliminal message that I'm sending your way for us to host a Hawaii affordable housing conference again. And this time have me out at it. I think I missed out on that first one.
Yes, we are planning another conference in Hawaii for the fall. And yes, Hawaiian shirts will be the business casual attire of attendees.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm ready then. I've got two of them. Couple
Yes,
notes.
go ahead.
Also, last time being my first, I made a kind of a big deal about noting that Tony Grapponi and Peter Lawrence and Brad Elphick, among others, had a head start on me but I would quickly try to catch up with them. So I asked your producer, Brad Stanhope, to send me some statistics, and they're not good as far as my ability to catch up with Tony, among others. So this time last year, apparently Tony had presented 13 times and I had done one. So now I'm at number 2. And in the interim, Tony has now presented 11 more times. So I feel like, I don't know if I'm ever going to catch up. So kudos to you, Tony. You've got the belt currently, the championship belt. But
No, Tony does, in part because of the renewable energy finance, tax credit finance series. So this is usually, before we talk about the core of the topics that I have a guest on for, I'll ask the partner or other colleague, Novogradac colleague, what services they provided Novogradac clients. Since you're not so much a direct professional service provider, but you are obviously serving clients of Novogradac. So I thought I'd ask you to describe our e-learning platform for the audience.
yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think if we step back and we think about what it is that Novogradac does as a professional services firm, we're in the business of expertise. Like, you have deliverables in the form of an auditor's report or of a signed tax return or any other forecasts or appraisals that we would produce. But even on this podcast, your deliverable is updates understanding or any other nuggets of knowledge. That's a weird way of saying it, but you're updating and informing the industry. So that's really an extension of what we're attempting to do on a webinar. But I'm sure your audience is aware of this, but the Internal Revenue Code and the accompanying regulations and IRS notices, they're not light reading. And so we do everything in our power to try to simplify and clarify all of those muddy aspects of the Internal Revenue Code, the accompanying statutes, so that people can have confidence when they're involved in these community development and tax credit incentive, these transactions. Because I think if they aren't confident in their own knowledge, there can be a real reluctance to jump into the pool and do deals and collaborate with others. So that's really the intent of what we're going for. Now, as a webinar, I get the benefit of utilizing not just the audio, but we try really hard to exploit, probably isn't the right word, but we try really hard to take advantage of the visual as well. And if I could incorporate sense of smell and taste, I'd do it, but I haven't figured out that one yet. But yeah, it really gives us an opportunity to say, for example, there's a difficult statute. And so we'll bring it up on the screen. We'll highlight just a one particular phrase of that, talk about it with our different panelists and say, what's the current interpretation industry-wide of how this is applied? And then we'll develop often very elaborate models and examples to illustrate how that plays out in real life.
So thank you for that. And you'd have webinars as well as on-demand e-learning?
Correct.
So one thing I mention oftentimes in the course of the podcast is there's only so much time in a podcast, and we're basically flying along trying to discuss topics in a very accurate way, niche topics, but not going into sort of greater depth. And we'll oftentimes be referring the audience to upcoming conferences, as well as some of your webinars, both live and on demand. So I thought it would be good if you could share a little bit more about what the average length of a webinar is and the way in which it's you approach it. Because on the one hand, I'm sure the audience is looking at it and saying, more is more. So if the webinars are sort of longer, I'm probably getting deeper knowledge. At the same time, if it's longer, is it really going to keep my attention for the length of it? So if you could address that for the audience, that would be great.
No, that's funny because when we first really started diving into webinars, there's a thought of, well, how long is the average attention span? I know that at conference panels, you typically go 50 minutes or maybe an hour and 15 minutes, and then you need to take a break, move on, etc. And I told people that this was a few years ago that our average webinar length was probably 2.5 hours. And some people couldn't fathom that. They're like, what can you possibly talk about for 2.5 hours? And since then, our average webinar length has actually grown. And we're getting to a point where a 2-hour webinar, we teach it. And then based on the questions that come through from the audience live that we address, some of those are so common that we just absorb them into the prepared material for next time. And we're also reading the feedback. We take that very seriously, and we do debriefings immediately after when everything's still fresh with the panelists and say, okay, if we were going to improve this and tweak it for next time, what would we do? How would we teach this better? I mean, this is kind of a lofty goal, but my goal is that if there is a conversation to be had that would clarify a specific topic in the community development tax credit incentive space, I want the most clear, effective conversation to be happening on the Novogradac e-learning platform. Like I said, that's kind of, maybe it's an unrealistic goal, but it's something to always be shooting for. So what ends up happening is webinars that were 2 hours long become 2.5 hours long, and then they go 3. And it's at the point when they need to get bigger than 3, we've gotten enough feedback where people say, you need to break this up somehow. So we either need to split them up and to do separate webinars or like a day 1, day 2, like we've done a few times this year. But I like the fact that people want more information. So as you often say, Mike, more is more. And if there's a topic that people want, we need to be able to deliver that, or at least that's the goal.
No, and I think when I've participated in webinars and the rest, I've always been impressed with the visual, uh, the graphics, the animations, and the like. And I myself, if there is such a thing as learning styles, and I know there's some debate about other truly different learning styles, but I think of myself as a visual learner. And I always appreciate the graphics that you develop that can help uh, clarify a concept. Because certainly one thing about the podcast is we generally aren't using graphics and the like. And as a consequence, if we're talking about, like I just had Peter Lawrence on, he's had budget, you're just kind of rattling off a bunch of numbers in the course of a podcast, which is important and the information needs to get out there, but it's not quite as easy to access and frame as opposed to like seeing a chart and discussing the chart that you're looking at to get the visual stimulation as well. And I think when we were preparing for the podcast, you thought maybe you would want to give some examples, which obviously for those listening to this podcast and not viewing it through YouTube, you're going to be a little challenged here. But if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get to see some of the benefits and the types of graphics that Wayne uses as part of the various webinars on the various community development tax incentives. You want to take it away on that front, Wayne?
I
Or
do.
I catch you off guard.
No, let's go ahead and share my screen here. And so you should be able to see me at the bottom part of the screen, Mike.
Yes, indeed, I can.
Okay, this is actually kind of funny because for better or worse, I pride myself on us having good graphics that are enlightening and entertaining. So the first thing I'm showing here is just a bunch of bullet points. Like, no, that's what we're going beyond bullet points. We want to be
That's what I was going to say.
as we say,
like the old way.
Yeah, we want to make sure this is not your grandfather's PowerPoint presentation. So we will use as many, hopefully dynamic graphics as we can. So for example, these are some slides that I'm showing from our recent eligible basis webinar, where we very deliberately set up a visual of what a generic property or site might look like. And it enables us to highlight different aspects of assets that might be part of that site, including offsite improvements as well. And then what the attempt is, what we're doing is having a shared or communal experience amongst everybody watching. And when you just have the words up there, everybody can form their own pictures, but then when they have those conversations afterward, they're not having the same point of reference per se. So to the extent that we do the visuals here and everyone walks through it, like we'll introduce something where in eligible basis, we start with the visual of a large circle. I guess this is an oval, but it's a ring where we say this is total project costs. And then inside of that are items that are capitalized to fixed assets. And then inside of that is what's included in eligible basis. And so this is something that we'll do throughout the presentation and set it up as kind of like a base camp to where everything we talk about will come back to this and say, well, where does that fit? And we say, okay, well, we just talked about those items that are in the outer ring, but now let's talk about the items that get just inside of that second ring. So I was presenting this with Dirk Wallace, and at one point he's like, oh, it's like those Russian nesting dolls. And I said, oh, Dirk, you should not have said that, because I said, so what you're saying, Dirk, is it's like a nesting doll. So Mike, for those of us who are only listening, what are you seeing on your screen right now?
I'm just saying a top selling Russian nesting doll with Dirk Wallace's face.
Oh, and you'll just have to trust me. Like, we've utilized this now 3 or 4 times, but the first time when he hadn't seen it, it was money. It was so fun to do. And so that's the level. I mean, we try to keep it light, keep it fun, but always keep it useful and professional. Animations can be a little gratuitous. I think that was always the danger when people discovered animation with PowerPoint. They just have some kind of a movable GIF or GIF in the bottom corner. Remember some of those where it would just be a cat moving its
Right.
arms, and you're like, what does that have to do with the bullet points? That they're like, well, nothing. We just heard animation is good. So, and then so as we go through, there's different things that, because of the visuals, and it enables us, as I mentioned, to talk about, well, you combine all of these items that are included in the eligible basis and into a wad of dough, and then you just cut it up proportionate to the different buildings or building identification numbers, and then we have examples where we really can drill down. And I think what's interesting is you can spend 20 minutes on an elaborate slide and introduce different aspects of it, and you're bringing everyone along together. I think I've used the analogy in the past where oftentimes when we're conveying information, a lot of it is almost like you're at a batting cage, and you see 10 pitches, and if you miss the first one, it's fine. Maybe you'll hit the second one and the third and the fourth. So you're 9 out of 10. But more often, I would say it's more like an expedition where you're going up the side of a mountain. You're trying to bring as many people together as possible. So as the instructors, what we're trying to do is teach something, pause, look around, assess, get their feedback, and say, all right, is everybody there with us, or did we lose people back on the trail? Because the last thing I want to do is get to the very top and say, we made it, and turn around and realize that I lost several people along the way. So that's something that we really try to incorporate as we teach some of these concepts. So yeah, I'm obviously a huge fan of visuals and the dynamics that they can present, and they enable us to really get specific and use numbers. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is complex because it has to do with the tax code and with laws and regulations. So, Mike, have you seen enough?
I have never seen enough, but we can, you can unshare the screen, but I love all the animations. And I just find, when I'm teaching as well, the animations just make a lot of, what you're saying, the fact that you can visually see things happening can also form some logic change in your mind.
Yep. All right. Let's go ahead and stop that. And again, for anyone who was listening to this on the treadmill or while they were driving, it is the most amazing thing. You missed out completely. They'll be talking about that for a long time. Now we'll include some screenshots or something in the
As
end.
well as they can kind of go back to our YouTube channel if they want to watch the video.
Exactly.
So share with our audience who the typical presenters are.
Well, this part's fun. The presenters are either a Novogradac partner or principal or manager, someone who has some expertise in the topic at hand, which makes sense because that's what Novogradac specializes in. But we're quite often able to loop in industry experts. So, for example, I do a financing webinar here. We'll do at the beginning of May. It's financing low-income housing tax credit properties using private activity bonds. So in that one, I'm joined by a bond attorney, and then by a former underwriter, now lender, and also by a developer who deals exclusively with low-income housing tax credit private activity bond deals. And that really enables people to get a big, a well-rounded view of the different perspectives. So those are typically the, what other options are there? We got Novogradac people and non-Novogradac people. I guess that's everyone.
And then the audience, who generally makes up the audience?
Often it would make sense. It's your developers and others who work in local, state governments, lenders, investors, really anybody who wants to know more about how this stuff really works. I would assume that there's a lot of overlap maybe between your podcast audience and the webinar audience. I would say we tend to skew maybe more toward uh, people who are not attending Novogradac conferences. I think for budgetary reasons, maybe at a Novogradac conference, you send 1 or 2 people that are really needing to network, but you can have 2 or 3 times that many people that need the information, but maybe don't need to network or fly halfway across the country.
Right. And plus, it's also, the various topics really sort of govern who the audience will be in terms of newer to the various community development incentive versus pretty experienced. Obviously, there's a whole group of property managers that attend the property management uh, training webinars. And then when we do it for long-term tax credits, historic tax credits, new markets, renewable energy opportunity zones and the like. So depending upon, what aspect of the development space they're working, obviously kind of governs as well. So if you could also talk about the certifications, because in addition to sort of running the webinars and e-learning and other external training, you also oversee the Novogradac certifications. So please share with our audience the certifications that we offer and how they can learn more about them.
So Novogradac offers a basic Novogradac community development certification and that one's fairly easy. You go on, you purchase a bundle of webinar recordings. Each certification there has low-income housing tax credit basics and then a new markets basics. And then there's an option to where if you want to get an emphasis in the opportunity zones versus the renewable energy or historic tax credit. So there's really 3 flavors or 3 variants of that. But that's just to give people a well-rounded view of some of these tax incentives. And then I would say our main or our bigger certification is the Novogradac property compliance certification. That we instituted in October of 2013. So it's been a dozen years now that we've had it. And more than 2,000 people have earned their NPCC. And this is where you do the whole big 10 to 12 hour workshop. And then there's an exam at the end. It's 10 business days, open book, and it's online. And if you pass that exam, then you get the Novogradac property compliance certification. And it's an accomplishment for people to get. We've intended for that to not be so easy that you don't even have to know anything. You just attend and I'll pass that. But it's something that would indicate that you have a grasp of a lot of these concepts in low-income housing tax credit property compliance.
Right. Very targeted towards on-site and off-site managers that are focused on ongoing tenant compliance, both the lease up and the ongoing certifications.
Correct. And we actually have some news, I would say. So we have been offering some iteration of Novogradac's property compliance workshop. My records, this predates my joining Novogradac in 2003, show that your colleague Jim Kroger was teaching some version of this workshop all the way back to 1999. You can correct me if you have better data on that. But then I became involved in teaching it in person as part of our Novogradac conferences. It was kind of a separate track back in 2009. And then in 2016, we have been hosting it mostly online. And so that enables us to do it more times per year and have a more national audience at any given time and be flexible. And so this coming April here, in a couple of weeks, will mark the 50th time that I have hosted the property compliance workshop online. So I tend to be a fan of milestones and benchmarks. So I think that's pretty significant. But what's most significant about that is partly due to the HOTMA changes, Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act. It's caused us to have to go through and take the engine apart and throw the pieces all over the garage floor and put it back together. That has enabled us to split it now, finally. I know there were some on-site managers that maybe wished we had done this earlier, but we're really going to have what we will call a basics, where it really has to do with qualifying the tenants, looking at verification forms, rents, utility allowances, et cetera. And then some of the more strategic things that we had talked about, calculating credit recapture, or some of those uh, strategic elements that owners will care about at the beginning of year one and during construction and development. That's going to be broken off into an advanced workshop. So we're pretty excited about the opportunity to not only always be doing minor tweaks, but this one's going to be fairly significant.
So I mentioned in the intro that we have some new options on our platform. Please share with our audience what those new options are.
I'd say one of the new options is what I mentioned, is the splitting of the property compliance workshop. So we're pretty excited about that. Another is a membership. So to this point, we've had 2 memberships. One is what we'll now be referring to as the NovocoTraining basic membership. So people, you purchase it for a certain rate, and then it gives you really deep discounts on all of the content you may purchase during the year subscription. And a lot of people have done that, and you basically, the discounts that you receive on the content pay for the cost of the membership after purchasing 3 to 5 pieces of content, something like that. And then the other one was just an all you can eat, everything on the library you can get. But that has been, to this point, executed via an engagement letter with organizations. And we have typically done that only if you have at least 5 people. And so you can have 100 people, you can have 150 people, you can have 30, but we've executed that via an engagement letter. And the exciting new news is that we are now launching here shortly an all access, all you can eat membership to our website for individuals. And so that should be pretty exciting for obviously individuals, but even organizations that only have maybe 2, 3, 4 people that would want an all you can eat, all access pass to the e-learning library, where before they're like, this was maybe better if we had 10 or 15 people, but what if we only have 4? So that's something that we're going to be able to do through the shopping cart, not via an engagement letter. We've gotten some good feedback about that being something that would be useful to people. So we're happy to be able to provide that here soon.
I probably should have started off with this question, which is what's coming soon on the NovocoTraining platform. So we've talked a lot about the platform, both live webinars and on demand, as well as other external trainings that you do. But I know you have a number of webinars in the queue. So please let our audience know what they can be signing up for in the coming weeks or months.
Sure. So first of all, within a couple of days of the airing of this episode, on the 10th of April, 10th and 11th, because this is one of those examples where it got too big and we had to spread it over 2 days, I will be joined by Novogradac principal Julie Lawrence, and we'll be talking about 4% tax credits in combination with private activity bonds. And much of that is comparing and contrasting the rules of private activity bonds with the Section 42 low-income housing tax credits. And then that will make a great pairing with what we would refer to as the sister webinar in May, where I bring in the financing element and I meet with the attorney and the underwriter, former underwriter and now lender and developer. And Mike, as everyone is aware, the HUD limits are out. And so we always do an annual HUD limits webinar where I'll be joining Thomas Stagg on the 17th of April. And we'll do, like I said, that annual HUD limits webinar. And then there is the first iteration of that basics property compliance workshop will be held on April 22nd through 24th. So that's just the next 4 weeks or so. And then we even have Nicolo Pinoli. He'll be doing year 15 at the end of May, and we'll probably squeeze in some other stuff in there in between.
Excellent. And I'll include a link in the show notes to the web page for the audience to access the list of the upcoming webinars. So I do appreciate you joining me on the podcast, Wayne. Before we bring this to a close, what else would you like to share with our audience about e-learning at Novogradac?
I would just say, I would invite people to visit training.novoco.com, and you can look at the lineup, and often the most popular is the basics version of something. So it's a great place to start. People often ask, like, where should I start? Well, start with the basics one. And then we have recommendations. Someone asked me the other day, they said, well, how do we get from zero to hero? What would be the order in which you would recommend to take certain courses? And then, so we've recommended that to people so they can build upon it. But if they feel like they have a group of people who want to do several courses, then we'd be very happy to talk with them and explain the benefits of memberships.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Wayne. I will share your email address in today's show notes, so those in our audience that want to reach out to you and get more information can reach you directly. In a moment, we'll go to the off mic section, but I do want to remind our audience, please subscribe to the podcast and whatever platform you use or platforms, and please share the podcast with your colleagues who may also find the Tax Credit Tuesday podcast of interest. And we do have a full archive of episodes available on our website at novoco.com. So Wayne, we are now in the off mic section. As you know, we like to use this space to give a shout out to someone working in one of the many areas we work. We get to highlight a professional worthy of recognition. Wayne, who would you like to give a shout out to?
Well, I would like to shout out Mary Manuel of Sinair. Sinair is a large fund manager, syndicator for tax credits, and Mary is the learning and talent director there. So the reason I want to shout her out is shortly after we instituted our organization level all access membership, Mary had seen that and reached out to us and said, we want to incorporate this into our ongoing internal corporate training. So they've been fantastic collaborators with us in letting us know how we can best meet their needs and how they bring on, new hires and others, and they will weave in fairly seamlessly Novogradac content to augment what they're doing internally. So that's been fantastic. And Mary's been, like I said, giving us very good feedback.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And Mary, let me extend my thanks as well for what you're doing to help educate both the current crop of community development professionals as well as the future crop. Wayne, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Always a pleasure.
I look forward to having you back.
Good. I'm 3 away from my 5-timers gold jacket.
We'll see how quickly it'll take, how long it'll take you to get your gold jacket. And to our audience, I'm Michael Novogradac. Thanks for listening.
This weekly podcast has been brought to you by Novogradac and Company, LLP. Archived podcasts are available online at www.novoco.com/podcast or by subscribing to the Tax Credit Tuesday podcast in iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Radio Public. You can find related links referenced in this podcast on our website at www.novoco.com/podcast. Novogradac and Company, LLP is a national certified public accounting and consulting firm with offices nationwide. Learn more about our professional services at www.novoco.com.